but what are the legal and ethical implications of requiring vaccine certificates? For more on that, I want to bring in a panel of experts. Kerry Bowman is a bioethicist at the University of Toronto, and he's joining us from Toronto. And Lorian Hardcastle is a professor at the University of Calgary School of Law and Cummings School of Business, and she's joining us from Calgary. Thank you both for taking the time. So, Lorian, I want to start with the legalities involved here. Can provinces mandate that citizens have vaccines in order to access certain things?
They can, and certainly private businesses can as well, but that's always going to be limited by human rights law. And so they always have to have contingencies in place so that they can accommodate those who can't be vaccinated. For example, for health-related reasons, or there may be arguments around religious accommodation if there are religious opposition to vaccines.
Okay, so, but Lorian, there are some exemptions that you listed there, but could an employer, could a business force its employees to get vaccinated if they want to come back into the workplace?
They could, and this most often comes up in the context of healthcare workers. And there's been a lot of discussion around whether healthcare workers can be required to be vaccinated. And indeed, employers can do this, but it's important that, particularly in the case of unionized workers, they work closely with the union before putting into place those kinds of requirements.
So, Kerry, let's talk about some of the ethics here. One argument in favor of mandating vaccine certificates is that it will motivate people to get vaccinated who may have otherwise been reluctant. But how ethical is that for governments to be doing?
Well, Andrew, is that motivation or is that coercion, right? So there's always, how you look at these things. Look, I just don't think we're there yet. Good ethics is really grounded in good science. And the numbers of the international situation is horrendous, but that's a separate conversation. The numbers of vaccinated people in Ontario and throughout the Canadian provinces and territories is rising quite quickly. If we were to have some form of vaccine passports, and that's a giant if, we would have to have very strong evidence that there's no other, I'm speaking from an ethical point of view, that there's nothing else we could do that's less coercive, less intrusive. So it would have to be proportional. I don't think any of that balances. I actually agree very much with Dr. Moore's comments yesterday, Dr. Karen Moore of Ontario, that we may not need it. We may, and I think we could have that conversation. But Andrew, also, from an ethical point of view, freedom of movement is, I'm not going to say it's a legal right. I doubt it is. But, within a mature democratic society, freedom of movement is very important. And we may not think about it much. And look, there will be an element of surveillance, whether it's intentional or not, with all of this.
Well, Lorian, one of the flashpoints for this has been colleges and universities. And yesterday we saw Seneca College here in Ontario say everyone on campus has to be vaccinated for this upcoming school year. So that's in class, I think it's 90,000 in that community. Everyone, not just people living in residence, but in-class learning, all faculty, staff, everyone. And they say they're doing it proactively for the safety of the 90,000 people on campus. There are lots of predictions that there could be a fourth wave in the fall as the weather gets cooler and people go back inside. So, what are the legal implications of a college or university doing this?
Yeah. So again, certainly they can do this. There's nothing legally really to act as a barrier to stop them from doing this. Although again, they do need to be mindful of human rights obligations. But again, it would really come more down to the ethics, because legally there's little to stop them as long as they accommodate those who can't be vaccinated. And indeed, the school vaccine laws provide a bit of a precedent here. Ontario is one of few jurisdictions that actually has mandatory vaccine legislation for children attending school, subject to again, narrow exceptions for those who claim conscientious objections or health-related exemptions. So there is a precedent in Ontario.
But Kerry, let me ask you, I know, you say we're not there yet, but in Quebec, for instance, they do have a QR code. So they say that they could require some sort of proof of vaccination. if there are to be outbreaks in the future in the fall, and that is going to allow the economy and society to, generally speaking, function quite well. And otherwise, if Ontario, for instance, or other provinces sort of sit back and wait, oh, let's see, then we could be in another lockdown situation because of the few people that have refused to get vaccinated. Not those with, medical exemptions, but those who have just refused to get vaccinated. So isn't that a problem?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting with Quebec, and I think somewhat wise with Quebec, is they're saying if we need it, fourth wave emergency September, not now. But I mean, I think that Quebec is telling us this now because they're very much hoping, and I don't criticize them for this, to get as many younger people vaccinated as possible. So we may need it, but look, I think, again, we would have to look at this scientifically. Do we even know that vaccine passports work, so to say? They seem to, but we're guessing. We don't really know, and I think we could move there. But, I would also add, and I guess I have a little bias here, I'm a university professor myself, but, colleges and universities are also moral environments. And the defense of a college like Seneca could be, we're trying to protect people. But you're also dividing people. Like, what are international students supposed to do? Because remember, the position they're taking is Canadian vaccines only. The World Health Organization has a list. We're not going to use that list. We're going to use our own list. So students from the People's Republic of China, or have received vaccines from the Russian Federation, they're not going to be able to come.
Yeah, no, those are interesting kind of debates within the debate of it all, and
Yes.
not to kind of sideline them, but the general concept. We're thinking about for people who. Hey, I'll use the CBC as an example. For people who work in a building, I'm required to come in, and my floor director and lots of people in the control room are required to come in. At some point, there could be more and more people coming back to work. I mean, what is the right of the employer, or of the employees to kind of know about the status of people coming back into the building or not?
Go for it, Laurie.
Sure. Sure.
No, but this is so much. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one, but I mean.
Certainly it's very different for the employer to collect that kind of information to ensure the safety of employees. And potentially to aid in contact tracing and those sorts of issues. But the employer collecting the information is quite different than the employer disclosing that information to other employees. And so when we're talking about the collection and disclosure of information, they're only able to do that where it's reasonable and where the disclosure is necessary to achieve some sort of reasonable purpose. And in that case, it's not clear to me what the purpose would be in an employer telling everybody who's vaccinated and who's not.
Though let me ask it differently, Lorian, let me ask it differently. Could an employer force people to be vaccinated before going back to work? And could that be kind of or could employees demand that of their employer?
Well, so certainly an employer could make vaccinations in the workplace mandatory to those human rights kind of accommodations. But in terms of employees being the ones to demand it, they're really not in a position to do that apart from applying pressure to the employer. So there's no real kind of legal mechanism for them to demand that, barring, I guess, a complete rampant outbreak that was of such proportions that it made the workplace unsafe. They could demand that the employer under occupational health and safety law do something, or they would refuse to work. But that's a very extreme kind of situation.
Yeah, Kerry, let me ask you. We're talking about ethics. What about the ethics of unvaccinated people going into indoor restaurants or going to concerts, going to these big events? Is that right?
No, it's ethically very problematic. If you're creating risks for other people, there's obviously an ethical element to that. And raising people's awareness about that as much as we possibly can. Because remember, many people are more vaccine hesitant than vaccine denial. Vaccine denial is much tougher. but raising people's consciousness about this. You know, from an ethical point of view, so much of this is not whether I or you want a vaccine, it's also our social obligation. Believe me, these things resonate, but you know, once they're mandatory, the ethical equation changes very, very quickly. And in fairness, Canada's doing quite well on this front, and we have momentum. I'm not naive. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, but we have to let this play out for now and continue to encourage people, because most people do care about the well-being of other people.
Lorian, just a last thought from you.
I think that's absolutely true. I think that, you know, obviously passports are probably going to be demanded in some form because there'll be international jurisdictions that demand them. But in terms of their domestic use, I think we need to need everything we can to educate and encourage people to be vaccinated rather than using coercive mechanisms.
This was an interesting discussion. I think it's the first of many that we're going to have in the weeks and months to come. Thank you both very much. That's Lorian Hardcastle, a professor at the University of Calgary School of Law and Cummings School of Medicine, and Kerry Bowman, a bioethicist at the University of Toronto. Thank you.